Hi everybody. I thought I would talk about something slightly different today, other than accounts and tax, as there's quite an interesting High Court case on in Ireland at the moment, in the High Court in Dublin at the moment, between John Magnier, who's a bloodstock owner, a very wealthy bloodstock owner, and Maurice Regan, who's a US construction magnate. John Magnier, as I said, is probably one of the wealthiest bloodstock owners in the world. He's got interests, ranging, depending where you're looking, from 2 to 4.5 billion. He employs about 18,000 people in the UK alone, so that'll give you an idea of his wealth. The dispute between the two parties is in relation to the purchase of a farm in Ireland called the Barn Estate. It's been in the same family for hundreds of years, and Magnier put an offer of 15 million euros, and which he says was accepted by the vendors, who reneged on the contract and sold it to Maurice Regan, the US construction magnate, for 22.5 million. Magnier's position is that he had a contract, and a binding contract. And this is where the difficulty arises, because under Irish law, which is virtually identical to UK law in this area, for a contract for the sale of land to be valid, it must be in writing, or there must be a memorandum signed by the vendor confirming the sale. There is an equitable release from that, in that it can be enforced even if there's as long as there's an oral agreement, and the purchaser can show part performance. It's a complicated area, and it's interesting as well. Just to talk briefly about how the deal started. It was by handshake, basically, and Magnier at the final meeting for the exchange of for the agreement for the sale, it was present at the meeting were John Magnier, the vendors, and John Magnier's agent, who manages these stud farms in Ireland, and. Yeah, it's just it's funny. It's funny watching the rich crossing swords over these things, but it's most people wouldn't go to court over this. They would just accept it, because if you haven't got a contract in writing, with the costs in the High Court, you're on pretty tricky ground, and the costs in the High Court in Ireland would probably be about 15,000 euros a day, and it's probably going to go on for 3 or 4 weeks, so you can see the legal costs involved in it. Anyway, at the meeting to finalise the contract, as I said, it was basically a handshake. Magnier says that at the meeting that the vendors left the room to phone the trustees of the Barn Estate, because the Barn Estate itself was actually held in a Jersey trust. So for the sale to be agreed, it would have to be approved by the trustees. So he says that they left the room to phone the trustees, came back in, said that the trustees had agreed, they shook hands, and that was it. They are denying now in court that that's that actually took place. So Magnier's evidence has been backed up by his manager and also his wife. So. It's very unusual in that it's very difficult to see how he can rely on just that. There is something else he can rely on, and maybe that's where he's going with it. It's a thing called part performance, where the law states that even if you haven't got a written contract, in certain circumstances you can rely on an oral agreement for the sale or transfer of land if there has been part performance. By part performance, they mean that there's they could show there was an oral contract, there was offer and acceptance, and that an example of part performance would be where he was allowed, to make substantial alterations to the land, for example, or had paid virtually all of the purchase price. So it would have to be something very material for him to argue part performance, which doesn't appear to be there in this case. It's just payment of a deposit isn't enough. Anyway, it's in the Irish High Court at the moment. It's an interesting case because of who's involved. The law is virtually, exactly the same in the UK. So it'll be interesting to see what way that goes. So yeah, there it is for today. Just something different. Okay, thanks for listening.